All right, good afternoon. Fresno County Sheriff John Zanoni here today to talk about an incident that occurred last night on October 17th at around 9:47 p.m., which would have been Wednesday. Members of our multi-agency gang enforcement consortium were working in the area of 8th and Tulare Avenues in Fresno, doing their normal proactive gang and patrol sweeps, when they witnessed a disturbance between a large group of individuals that were possibly gang members. As deputies were observing this, they also saw a man who would be later identified as Adam Canales of Fresno get into a white SUV and leave this area of the disturbance at a high rate of speed, driving recklessly. As he went northbound on 8th Avenue from Veru, he went through Tulare, not stopping at the stop sign, and continued northbound on 8th Street. At that time, our deputies who were in the area were almost struck by the vehicle, and they immediately attempted to turn around to engage the vehicle to stop it for the traffic violations. At which point, our deputies became involved in a vehicle pursuit, and this pursuit went from 8th Street up to Nevada and then went eastbound on Nevada from 8th Street towards Cedar Avenue. At that time, as our deputies were trying to catch up to this suspect vehicle, which had already been driving recklessly, the suspect vehicle ran the stop sign eastbound Nevada at eastbound Nevada at Cedar. And at that point, the vehicle failed to negotiate the turn and crashed into a residence on the east side of Cedar, which would have been slightly north of Nevada, because at that point, Nevada doesn't go through past Cedar. It's a T intersection, basically, and this residence is what the vehicle struck. At that point, when the vehicle struck the residence, it went into a bedroom of the residence, and unfortunately, there were two individuals in that room. One of them was Meng Yang, 25 years old, of Fresno, and the other was Eliza Yang of Fresno, who was 18 years old. Both individuals are sisters who live at that location, and they were pronounced deceased at the location as a result of the vehicle that was being pursued driving through the house and striking both of them. Adam Canales of Fresno was the driver of the vehicle. He failed to pull over when the deputies turned on their lights and sirens, and he is the one who is responsible for the deaths of these two innocent, uninvolved young women who died as a result of his negligent and aggressive actions. Mr. Canales ran from the scene of the accident, and he was arrested about 3 houses to the east by members of our multi-agency gang enforcement consortium. Once he was taken into custody, he was then transported to a CRMC for treatment for some injuries. The scene out there, as many of you may have seen, you saw the video, you'll see it right here, where the vehicle is into the house. Adam Canales was driving at an extremely high rate of speed in order to go all the way into the house and actually push through, and as you can see, his entire vehicle is inside the residence. It's a very tragic situation. All Mr. Canales had to do was do the right thing, obey the law, obviously not driving reckless in the first place. But once the deputies activated their lights and sirens, if he would have just pulled over, this whole tragic incident could have been avoided. The vehicle pursuit lasted approximately 27 seconds, and I want to emphasize that because as our deputy came on the radio and was calling out that he was in pursuit, by the time he gave out his location and another question was asked by a supervisor, our deputy was already coming back saying the suspect vehicle had crashed into the residence. So if you think about 27 seconds, it's a very, very short period of time. Literally, as soon as the pursuit started, it ended. So I want you to keep that in mind as we're looking at this situation. Mr. Adam Canales is 18 years old. He is a known gang member. He's known to law enforcement. He's currently on probation for possession of a firearm, and he has prior arrests for possession of firearms. We can't get into the details of those because those occurred prior to him turning 18 years old. One other thing I want to talk about is at the location where this large gathering occurred prior to Adam Canales leaving that location, right about the same time as he left, Fresno PD received a call for service at location of a large disturbance involving over 50 people. So there was some disturbance at that location where Adam Canales was leaving, got into his car, and he left at a high rate of speed. And then after our deputies engaged him and tried to stop him, Fresno PD later responded a few minutes later to that residence for a disturbance. Once the Fresno police officers were on scene, there was conflicting statements, but most of the people had dispersed by then, and the family member said the police was no longer needed. But we did get a call there that was related to Mr. Canales leaving the scene at a high rate of speed. As far as this investigation goes, because it occurred in the city of Fresno, I have Lieutenant DeWall here from the Fresno Police Department, from the Traffic Division, and they are conducting the investigation into the accident and trying to determine the exact cause of the collision and different factors. And due to it being a fatality, they are charging Adam Canales with 2 counts of Penal Code Section 192C1, which is vehicular manslaughter. He's also being charged with Vehicle Code Section 20001A, which involves hit and run. Vehicle Code Section 23103A for reckless driving, and Vehicle Code Section 2800.3A, which is when you're being pursued by law enforcement, and as a result of that pursuit, it results in injury or death of someone else. Should also be noted that Mr. Canales was under the influence of alcohol, and he'll also be charged with Vehicle Code Section 23136 because he is a minor. He's not a minor. He's under the age of 21. Any alcohol present in his system is a violation of that section. And he is also unlicensed, and he also did not have insurance for his vehicle. With that, I would like to open it up to any questions you may have.
Yeah, so Sheriff, if I'm getting the timeline correct, because a lot of times, people go, why are they chasing after somebody? Why don't they just let them go and, whatever. It literally was, he bolted, your deputies noticed, and by the time they couldn't even make the call through, he'd already wrecked the car. Is that essentially what happened?
They were able to call in the location they were at, the direction they were headed, and then almost immediately when our deputy called in that he had run the stop sign at Nevada and Cedar, the next words out of his mouth were he's crashed into the house. So it did happen rather quickly, and you can imagine when your adrenaline's pumping and you're trying to stop somebody who you already saw driving recklessly before you even tried to stop them, it makes for a very tense situation, and things move quickly.
And did you mention that he drove near deputies?
Yeah, as he came northbound on 8th Street through Tulare from the location of the disturbance, which was south of Tulare, he was driving very recklessly and almost hit a couple of our patrol cars that were right there in the area. And that's when they decided to turn around and decided to go after him and try to make an enforcement stop on the white Tahoe, which at the time they didn't know how many occupants were in the vehicle. All they knew that the vehicle was driving in a reckless manner.
Sheriff, how long, from start to the end of the pursuit, how long did it last?
Well, looking at the voice print, it's right around 27 to 28 seconds from the time that our deputy says that he has emergency traffic and he's in pursuit to when he first comes on the radio and says the vehicle has driven into a residence.
Does your department have a policy for terminating the pursuits when they get crazy, when the public is at risk?
Absolutely. We have a policy. We go through training. We go through a lot of different things to determine, and typically when you activate your lights and sirens and you attempt to stop somebody, you look at some factors like speed, is the person, running a stop sign, what's the person wanted for? But to process that, it does take a little bit of time because if we just turned our lights and sirens on and everybody that took off, if we turned it off, then we'd be sending a message to the public that that's what you'd be able to get away with. But there is an evaluation process, kind of like a risk reward, balance test to determine whether or not we're going to continue to chase them. But at 27 seconds, it's very difficult in that amount of time when you're processing everything, figuring out what they're wanted for, and then it happens before you can even get on the radio to even cancel yourself.
Did he pull over originally, or was it the lights came on and he just took off and then ran into the house?
I think the best way to explain it is he started off from this location of the disturbance at a very high rate of speed, driving recklessly, almost striking a couple of our multi-agency gang enforcement consortium units that were out there. At that point, they turned around and attempted to get behind him, to turn on their lights and sirens to get him to pull over. And he continued driving in a very reckless and with a manner of disregard for the public.
Over 100 miles?
I don't have the speed. The Fresno Police Department is conducting that investigation, and they'll need to do some things with the suspect vehicle in order to figure out what the speeds were and some of the times as far as, how fast the vehicle was traveling.
What cross street was the deputies almost hit?
They would have been up on 8th Street north of Tulare.
And then where did the disturbance originally happen?
The disturbance was down off of 8th Street and Veru. And Veru, I believe, is just south of Tulare. The location was 8th and Veru, which was just south of Tulare Avenue.
What else do you know about the disturbance? Are you looking for someone?
At this point, no, we're not. The Fresno Police Department responded to the scene, and by the time they got there, many of the people apparently had dispersed, and some family members at the location said that there was no issue at that time and that they didn't need the police there. So that's based on their call for service and what the notes the officer put in the call.
Does it appear he tried to stop at all before running into the house?
I don't have that information, but based on how far the vehicle got, into the residence, as you can see by the picture, I would say that he did not try to stop prior to that. It just, he was unable to negotiate the turn, and that's the result of his driving.
And these magic officers they had noticed something going on. That's when he sped off without making contact first, right? It was kind of like
Yeah, they
he
were-
stayed from the scene and then they saw him.
So just as I explained, they're north of Tulare Avenue working their proactive patrol. They had seen a large gathering down near Veru and 8th Street, and so they were kind of in the area, and then it caught their attention when this individual took off from that location at a high rate of speed, driving recklessly in the white Chevy Tahoe.
Can you talk about the victims? When were they pronounced deceased immediately, or any rescue attempts made?
So the way you can see by the picture here to my left with the vehicle and the residence, one of the individuals was trapped under the suspect vehicle, but the other one was somewhere inside the room up in the corner. If you're at the back of the vehicle, I think would have been up to the right. And it's just such a dangerous situation. I will say that there was a lot of really good Samaritans in that neighborhood. In talking to our deputies that were out there and watching some of the videos that people had shot, they came to the rescue of their neighbor. I mean, really, really good people who showed up. I mean, people were trying to lift the back end of the car up. People were trying to pull sections of the house that was the wall where the front of the vehicle is away. They were doing everything that they could. Someone even showed up with a floor jack in order to try to help these two individuals who were in that room who had been struck by the vehicle. Unfortunately, as it played out, the damage to the house was so significant that at one point we were afraid that the roof and the house was going to collapse around the vehicle. And then you'll see in some pictures later, for those who had media folks out at the scene, the fire department actually came in and put supports in underneath the eave of the house in order to ensure that the house didn't collapse on them while they were trying to do their rescue efforts. But I will say, just extremely good people that came to that location to try to help two of their neighbors. And in talking to some of our deputies, that took Adam Canales into custody, the neighbors that they talked to were so cooperative. We're like, hey, check my backyard, whatever you need to do to get this guy. And because we knew he had a prior for some firearms, we had asked them, hey, if you find a gun or a firearm in your backyard tomorrow in the daylight, would you please give us a call? And most of them were, hey, no problem. I'll give you a call. Anything I can do to help. So a very tragic situation in this case where two young ladies lost their lives because of Adam Canales' bad decision, inability to comply with the law, and the fact that, he crashed into this house and then he runs from the scene to try to get away. Really, I think, speaks to Mr. Canales and what kind of person he is. And hopefully the law is going to catch up with him and he's going to spend some time in jail for his actions in this case.
Sheriff, can you compare back when you were on patrol versus today? How common is it that people don't pull over for law enforcement, and what do you attribute it to?
Well, I think we see a number of vehicle pursuits that we have where people don't pull over. And as we discussed earlier, our policy and our training, and there's many times that we cancel those pursuits because the risk is too much. And we're deciding, the risk versus, the safety of the public versus actually apprehending the person for the crime that they're wanted for. So it happens quite a bit. And I think this is really attributed to the fact that today we live in a society where people just aren't held accountable. There isn't that threat of, hey, you break the law, you steal from a store, you do this, that you're going to go to prison or you're going to go to jail or you're even going to be arrested. I mean, on a much lower level, we see people walk out of stores all the time. They steal stuff. Loss prevention doesn't confront them. Law enforcement isn't called. And I think this is just a bigger, obviously more serious symptom of that, where individuals are, I'm just not going to pull over because I'm going to roll the dice. It's, the chances of me having to really get in trouble or, I got a better chance of getting away versus if I just pull over and I'm caught. So I think we've really kind of trained people in our culture today where it's like they've lost respect for the law, and we need to have more consequences, especially for things like this.
You mentioned he's not licensed nor insured. Whose vehicle was this? Was it his?
The information I received is that it is his vehicle.
What message you can tell to the community? Because obviously, talking about this, people can even feel safe inside of their homes.
Well, the message to the community is simple, is that this is a tragic incident that is isolated, that members of the community should be assured that, hey, our job is to go out there and enforce the law. Our job is to protect and serve. And we're going to continue to do that. And I don't want people to feel like this one isolated incident, which extremely tragic for these two young ladies. But remember, this tragedy was a result of the actions and the choices that Adam Canales made when he decided to drive recklessly and then continue to drive recklessly and not yield to the law enforcement officers who had their red lights and their sirens activated in an attempt to pull him over. You could look at it from another perspective, that if he continued driving recklessly and he's under the influence of alcohol, he's obviously under the age of 21, anything could have happened. There could have been a vehicle accident. There's a whole myriad of things that could have happened as a result of his actions and his negligence and his reckless driving. So we have to do a job. We have to enforce the law. It's against the law to drive recklessly. So sometimes things like this are going to happen, and these are somewhat unintended consequences. But we will get through it. I pray for and I feel for the family of these two young ladies. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we protect our community and we make sure our community is safe from people like Adam Canales.
Sheriff, I got one more question, and you might not even be able to answer this, but now we have a family of 9 that's been displaced, and it sounds like there was a Red Cross or anybody that was on scene to help them afterwards. It's a pretty tragic event. Do you know who notifies them Because like if it was just a house fire or something, more than likely Red Cross would come out and help them. But, you know, they had two of their family members die, and then their house is obviously not in any condition for them to stay. Like, who would that point of contact be in a situation like this?
Well, there's a couple different things. It could be the Red Cross. Obviously, they can contact Fresno County Risk Management in this case and things like that. I will say this. I drove by the house earlier today, and the 2x4s that go up and down to support the house have been replaced, and plywood has been put up, and the house actually looks structurally sound, and the supports that were there that the fire department had for the roof have also been removed. So there has been some progress made. Some folks have stepped up to help them out, but I'm sure they're going to need much more in the days and weeks to come.
Sheriff, have you met with the family, or do you plan to?
I have not met with the family. I do plan to. I'm trying to make sure that we have the investigation at least somewhat completed. So if I have any questions, or they have any questions of me, that I'm able to answer those questions. But last night when it occurred, we did have one of our assistant sheriffs, and we had several members of our staff out there at the scene talking to the family and being there to support the family and our deputies.
All right, thanks, guys.
Let the roll off the hook. Hey, take it easy. Take it easy. It's like little gadgets.